Please help me welcome to the stage Tara Mohr.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Everybody can hear me okay? Great. I'm so happy to be here. This is the neck of the woods where I grew up, actually, so nice to be back down on the peninsula. And I'm really thrilled to be talking with all of you about women playing big, how we end up playing small and how we can play bigger. And I want to begin by sharing with you why I started doing this work and how I came to be thinking about these topics. About 10 years ago, I was starting to make a big transition in my own career. I had identified that I didn't really love the work I was doing, and I wanted to be doing work that dealt with people's inner lives and helping them create the lives and careers they really wanted. And I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I thought coaching would have something to do with it. And so I had gotten trained as a coach. And while I was still working full-time in another job, during the evenings and the weekends, I was squeezing in this exploration of this new area and starting to coach mostly friends of friends and colleagues of colleagues who had heard I was exploring coaching and starting a little coaching practice. And most of the women that came to that practice, I had the exact same response to. I would sit across from these women in a coaching session and get to hear about their dreams, what they wanted for their careers, what they saw that was happening in their company or their organization that they had a critique of or a better vision for, what they thought their industry was missing. I got to hear all of these amazing reflections of their insights and their brilliance. And I just became so inspired by every single one of them, by the ideas they had, by their thoughtfulness, by how ethical and conscientious they were in their approach to their work. And so I just wanted to see them leading and having more influence and power in our world. And yet over and over and over again, I heard the same things from them. I'm not ready yet to take that next step. I probably need more training first. I need a few more years' experience. Don't I need another degree? If that was a good idea, someone would have thought of it already. Let me think about that more and do more research on it before I do anything about it. And I started to feel really pained by this because, as we all know, right, we look in the news headlines or we see the decisions that are being made by people in leadership, and we know that seems like our world deserves better. And here I was sitting across from these women. I thought, this is the better that we deserve. And yet it's somehow not, that brilliance isn't really making it to the seats of power and the places of influence where it deserves to be. And so that phenomenon, that gap between potential and how people saw themselves, I needed a shorthand way to label, and playing small seemed like a good term for it. And about the same time I had started blogging about personal growth topics and professional development topics, and a few years into blogging, my readership had grown, and I got very curious to learn more about who was reading and why. And so I sent out a survey to my readers, and in the survey, one of the questions was, what's the biggest challenge in your life, right? Probably many of you know from your work, that's a great market research question. You want to know, what are people feeling pained by and challenged by? And knowing that most of my readers were women, I had this list of options on the multiple choice survey of things I thought might be the biggest challenge in their life. So of course, I put work-family balance on there, because that's what everybody talks about as a huge challenge in women's lives. I put health issues up there and financial issues, relationship challenges, I'm not sure what I want, right? A whole host of things from different domains of life. And then I looked at that list and I thought, there's actually nothing on that list that reflects what I'm hearing from women in my coaching practice. And so kind of on a whim, I added, I'm playing small as a possible challenge that people could choose. And when the responses came back, that was what the most women said was the biggest challenge in their life. I'm playing small. And that was so striking to me that so many of us are walking around with some sense that we're playing small. And we feel challenged by it, meaning we must somehow be stuck there. We don't know how to fix that or change it. And so that became the focus of my work, trying to understand why are we playing small, and then most importantly, what really makes a difference? What makes a difference so we stop saying, I'm not ready yet. We stop saying, I need more qualifications. We start sharing more of ourselves more bravely. And I found through my coaching practice that there really were some tools and some new pieces of knowledge and some everyday moment-to-moment practices we could do that produced really big change for people quite consistently, whether they were in a junior or senior level of their career, whether they were working in business or the social sector, whether they were entrepreneurs or inside a large organization. The kind of fundamentals of change that needed to happen were the same. And those fundamentals became the basis for the work that I now do, for leadership trainings, for the book, and we're going to talk about some of the key pieces of that today. Before we jump into that, there's one important thing I want to address, because we are going to be talking today about the inner barriers for women around our playing bigger. And it can be easy for that to be misconstrued as then that disparity that we see in leadership, the challenges that women face are inside us, all our own fault, right? And I certainly don't want to convey that in any way. So first, I want to give voice to, of course, there are huge external barriers, many of which I'm sure through the Women at Google work you're learning about here, all kinds of bias, implicit and explicit, discrimination, the pay gap, so on and so on, right? And there are these inner issues, and the inner barriers that we face, the kind of playing small I'm talking about, I don't see as disconnected from those external barriers at all. So we didn't just make this up because we thought it would be great to play small and hold ourselves back, but rather that if you think about what it means to be a woman, right, in our time right now, we are in this amazing transitional moment in history. We're coming out of thousands of years of a legacy where women were pretty much marginalized entirely from professional life, political life, public life. And the legacy of that, the residue of that, is still so alive in our culture in many ways, in our media. It's so alive in the messages we get at school and often at home as well. And that has certain effects on how we see ourselves and how we behave. And so when we talk about the inner barriers, we're really talking about the inner imprint of that legacy and of that culture. Okay, so with that, let's jump in. We'll talk about 3 areas today where I commonly see so many women holding themselves back and where we can make really transformative change. And the first one is our inner critics. So anyone have one of these? Yes? 2 hands. 2 hands go up. Yeah. Anyone feel like you don't have an inner critic that you're burdened by or affected by as you move through your life or your work? Okay. Yeah, so most of us are aware that we do have this voice in our head that says not very nice things to us about ourselves, that voices a lot of self-doubt. And as much as we're aware of it, we also probably don't even notice. For most of us, we don't even notice about 90% of what it's saying because it's become so habitual. It's the water that we swim in, right? So that thought, oh, I'm just not good at that whole set of things. Oh, there's no way I could be the person to do that, right? Things that maybe we just feel like that's true about us or that's our way of thinking is often the inner critic. So the first piece of work we need to do is start to recognize, when am I hearing my inner critic? And start to notice it as a voice in our heads, not just how my thinking sounds, not just that's who I am, but start to notice it as one voice so that over time we can get connected to some of the other voices inside of us. So how do we recognize it? We listen for when do you hear a voice talking to you in a way that you would not intend to talk to someone you love? When do you hear the voice of, I'm not ready yet? That's usually your inner critic. For women, interestingly, there is really not good research that says we have more self-doubt than men. That's a common misunderstanding. But there is data that suggests women do feel more self-doubt than men around those things that are traditionally associated with masculinity in our culture. So that's quantitative work, financial work and decisions, negotiation, and leadership. There we see that women tend to have more self-doubt about themselves in those areas of skill and work. On the other side of the coin, there's some data that suggests that men feel more self-doubt around emotional and relational skills, like listening, reading nonverbal cues, and communication. So our self-doubt, of course, is showing up in what's been conditioned in our culture to have us think it's associated with us or people like us. So listen particularly, when do you notice that voice of, I'm just not good at those kinds of things? That's your inner critic. You might notice your inner critic is often also, for women, the voice of body perfectionism or self-consciousness around our bodies. It tends to be a very repetitive, broken record kind of voice. And it may take some cues from outer critics in your life, right? So you might notice, oh, that inner critic voice is saying a lot of things that when I really think about it, that sounds like an internalized voice of that really tough first boss I had, or that professor who delivered that really, really harsh feedback, or that person in my childhood who was very critical of me. But that's not true for everyone. You don't have to find an external source for your critic. You might just notice some echoes there. So starting to notice that voice. A question I get a lot around noticing the inner critic is, what's the difference between the inner critic and realistic thinking, right? There's good critical thinking that might realistically assess something and come back with, yeah, that's not that good. You're not ready yet. I'm not good at that, right? So how do we know when we're hearing that more irrational inner critic versus realistic thinking? And the way you can tell the difference there is really the tone of the thoughts in your head. It's not even a distinction of what those two voices say. They might have the same concerns. I'm not sure you're ready for that stretch assignment yet. But the way they talk to you about those concerns will be very different. So the inner critic will sound more anxious, more chattery, more repetitive. I'm not sure if I'm ready. I really don't think I could do that. What if this worst case scenario happens? More fearful about future consequences. And you'll notice that if it's your inner critic, it's not trying to move towards any solution or resolution of the problem. Realistic thinking might say, I am not sure if I'm ready, if I have what I need to take that stretch assignment. How can I find that out? Who could I talk to? How can I evaluate it? How can I test it? Is there a low risk way to do it? Let's think through what would be the worst thing that could happen. So you can hear the tone. Realistic thinking is curious, it's generative, and it's on your side. It moves forward down a path of reasoning, whereas your inner critic is going to loop and loop and loop. So why do we have this inner critic? What is it? What is it? And a mistake that I think a lot of us make, and I used to share this misconception, is that if we're not confident, if we feel a lot of self-doubt, one, that's a personal problem, something missing from us as individuals. And two, that somehow if we look back into our history, we can find the reason for it. Was it that I never learned to develop enough confidence doing competitive things as a kid? Was it these critical people in my life? Was it that my parents were so supportive of me that now, right, the world feels really dangerous and scary in contrast and everything feels so critical? We look to our biography for some sort of reason for that self-doubt. And after talking to so many women about their inner critics and really digging into the mechanics of self-doubt, I can say that that's not the place to find the answer. There's nothing in your life experience that is responsible for self-doubt. That, in fact, we're all hardwired. We're all hardwired to have that inner critic voice. And the reason is this, that we all have a very strong safety instinct, right? And the safety instinct is the part of us that wants to keep us safe from harm at any cost. It's a very old, ancient reptilian part of it comes from the reptilian part of our brain that's always on the lookout for danger and risk, right? And is trying to make sure we survive. That was very useful when human beings were faced with a lot of life-threatening dangers all the time. That instinct to look for danger and go into fight or flight when we perceive any possible danger is still alive in all of us. And in our modern time, it doesn't just fire when there's a physical threat. It fires when there's an emotional threat. So when we feel an emotional threat like, I might really embarrass myself saying that idea. I might really bring some conflict or criticism if I point out the elephant in the room that I see that nobody's talking about here. I might fail. I might be criticized. Those are all things we perceive as emotional threats. And the safety instinct is saying, no, we got to avoid all of those. Let's stay in the comfort zone. But if every time you wanted to take a stretch, a step in your life, or make a change, or do something that risked emotional harm, if every time your safety instinct just said, hi, I'm your safety instinct, I don't like that. I think we should stay exactly with the status quo. I think we should stay really safe over here. Let's not try it. Let's not speak up. You would say, no, I want to. I have a longing in me to try that thing. I want to make this change. And you would pretty quickly overrule your safety instinct. So our safety instincts have developed a more sophisticated, more effective strategy at getting us to stay in the comfort zone. Instead of saying, hi, I'm your safety instinct, please don't do that, the safety instinct says, you have no idea what you're talking about. Who do you think you are? You're not ready to say that yet. Let's go research it for a few months first and then come back and say it. And that is an intimidating enough narrative to get most of us to stay in that comfort zone. So the inner critic is a strategy that your safety instinct is using to make sure you don't do things that raise that risk of emotional vulnerability or possible emotional discomfort. And the problem is that just like in a company, you end up with a lot of problems when you have two departments that don't coordinate at all. The risk aversion department in us never talks to the fulfillment department or the reward department. It doesn't care. It really doesn't care if you ever have a fulfilled day in your life. It has one mission: stay in the comfort zone. So if we listen to it, that's what happens. We stay in the comfort zone, but we miss out on a lot. And that's what happens when we listen to our inner critics. So if we're hardwired for self-doubt, what do we do? What do we do about that? Safety instinct isn't going anywhere. Our desire to do things that have us risking failure and criticism also isn't going anywhere. So the thing we don't try and do is become confident. And this is where I am against all this advice that women should just become more confident, that we got to encourage our girls to be confident, that confidence is the answer. Because I know that the women who are leading and risking and speaking up and excelling don't feel confident as they're doing it. A couple of my favorite examples of this, one comes from Twyla Tharp, who is, how many people have heard of Twyla Tharp? She's one of the most famous choreographers of our time. She's won about 10 Tony Awards. She has tons of honorary degrees. Her work is celebrated all over the world. And she says, every time I start a new dance, when I go into the studio, I am completely sure that this is the one where the audience is going to walk out on opening night laughing because they're going to see my talent has run out. Another one of my favorite examples comes from Cherry Murray, who is the Dean of Engineering at Harvard. And she says, every single day I feel unqualified for my job. So what's fascinating about that, right, is that Twyla Tharp is doing the dance anyway, and Cherry Murray took that job and continues to show up at that job anyway. And that's the name of the game. It's how do I hear the voice of self-doubt? It's going to be very loud if you are truly playing to your potential. It's going to be very loud if you're sharing your voice and your gifts in the world, because the safety instinct doesn't like the risk that comes with that. So how do we let it be there and hear it, but not take direction from it in just that way that Cherry Murray and Twyla Tharp are talking about? So to do that, we need to, one, know that it's that voice when it's talking, right? Twyla Tharp actually says, and then I think, oh, there's that voice again. It's been there with me for every dance I've started to choreograph. And I know if I listened to it, I would stop choreographing entirely, right? So hearing the voice of self-doubt, recognizing it for what it is. You can even ask yourself in the moment, what does my safety instinct not like about this situation? When you hear self-doubt. So if you hear, I'm really just always been horrible at that and I'm going to totally screw this up, what does my safety instinct not like about this situation? And you'll see it immediately. Oh, it doesn't like that I'm going to get feedback on this that might hurt. It doesn't like that if I apply for this, I may get it or not, right? And then you can start to see why the inner critic is speaking up. It can also be fun, just a few more playful strategies you can use. You can create a character for your inner critic. So think about if you were going to give it a personality, what kind of personality, what kind of character personifies it for you. And then when you hear that voice, you can notice it as coming from that character, whether you imagine that visually or it's a particular voice. And that can just add some lightness and you can see the humor in what it's saying. And also it can help you remember that's not the core of me. The core of me is the part that has that desire to fulfill my potential. You can also even sometimes imagine it leaving the space that you're in. So if you are writing an important email and you notice you're feeling like you're being very perfectionistic in the editing of it and feeling like it's not going to come across right and you're hearing a lot of self-doubt about what you're saying, to actually picture that inner critic voice leaving the room, or picture the character leaving the room, and then come back to your screen. Okay, now it's just me, let's go. And it sounds hard to believe, but that actually can make a really powerful difference for people in how present that voice is for them. So noticing the inner critic voice, learning to live with it, not waiting on confidence. Please do not wait on confidence for anything that you're wanting to do. But rather, the answer is it's not becoming confident, it's having a new kind of relationship with self-doubt. Okay, so let's move on to a second topic, which is unhooking from praise and criticism. Unhooking from praise and criticism. And this is an area that really surprised me in my work with women, to see how many of the issues that people were coming to coaching with looked like one thing on the surface, but were really something else that had to do with their relationship to praise and criticism. So one of my clients came with, I've been working in my field for 25 years. I have done really well in it, but I see this huge problem with the conventional way things are approached in my field. She worked in domestic violence prevention and services. I see this huge problem, and I want to start my own program with a different approach. And my job is so demanding. I'm so overtaxed. I can never get to this thing. I want a coach to help me carve out the time and hold me accountable so I can make some movement on this thing. Okay, great. Well, I didn't know yet what I know now. It's just time is never the real issue. It's maybe the real issue, 0.5% of the time. But when we delved a little deeper, what was clear for her was she had always been a star within her field. She had always gotten a lot of positive feedback and excelled in the conventional way. And she knew that this new approach that she wanted to bring forward was going to be controversial. And as someone who had always been a good student in school and done well at work, that move to how am I going to launch something that I know will be controversial? Can I live with the criticism and feedback and the polarized reactions that are going to come my way was really what was keeping her stuck. So that's one example. Another was a woman who works in management consulting who said, I love my job, I love the analysis, I really like the work with clients, but I have been promoted to this new level, and now where I am, there's a lot of harsh feedback coming my way. Some of it is at this level, the way my colleagues and I, the culture of how we talk to each other, there's just a lot of criticism. Some of it is that now when the client doesn't like something, I'm the one that's hearing everything about it. And I am finding myself on such an emotional roller coaster with that, and so uncomfortable with it, that it's keeping me from liking my job. So I'm coming to coaching to figure out, should I change careers? Or wait, that doesn't seem right because I love the actual heart of the work. And so with her, again, we had to look at what's this relationship to criticism and negative feedback, and how does that block us? I have really found that for every person, and particularly for women, there is a point where we get stopped in our growth because of our relationship to praise and criticism. And that could be we're avoidant of criticism, we're seeking of praise. For some of us, it's that we're avoidant of a lot of praise. Paradoxically, if you grew up in a culture where you're supposed to blend in and don't brag and don't do things, don't try and be in the spotlight, you will unconsciously or consciously avoid the things that will bring a lot of praise. So that's another way we can get hooked. And so part of this journey to playing bigger is unhooking from praise and criticism. This does affect women in particular in a few ways. Certainly all of us human beings were affected by praise and criticism, but there's some interesting dimensions of how it affects women in particular. One is that we know women get more harsh criticism than men in the workforce, and we get more personal criticism. So some of you may have seen the study that was done by Karen Snyder. She's a linguist and a tech entrepreneur. She did a study looking at performance reviews from about 30 tech companies and analyzing them using a variety of linguistic tools. And she found that not only did women get a lot more negative feedback than men in their performance reviews, but 73% of the negative feedback that women got was criticism of their personality. And 2% of the negative feedback that men got was criticism of a personality trait. So this sense of the feedback we get is more personal and therefore more wounding for us, of course, and more becomes something that we are more alert on avoiding. There's a real gender gap there, right, in the kind of feedback we get. So of course, as a result of that, we're going to feel more hooked, more caught up in what's going on with the negative feedback we get. Another interesting factor that has a gender dimension is what I call the noisy room. And I call it the noisy room because I always felt when I was working inside a large organization, if I was in a meeting with 15 people around a conference table, that room felt incredibly noisy to me with the cues and the dynamics of everything that was going on amongst that group. So when people were talking, I would be noticing, well, that person really seems to be resisting everything that person's saying, and that person's in a really grumpy mood today, and that person's always just trying to win over these three people. All those dynamics, right? Very, very full of information. And I found that for me, that often sometimes got in the way of my ability to really push forward in the midst of complex dynamics and kind of see the main event, or let those dynamics just be and let the project go forward without feeling like they needed to be resolved. So I had noticed that in myself and noticed that I didn't see some of my male colleagues grappling with they weren't even aware of the things I was talking about. If I had to bring them up to be resolved, often they weren't even aware. And they certainly didn't think they needed to be resolved. And so then I was really intrigued when I read that there's research that supports exactly what that experience was on one, that there is a gender difference in the amount of information that women and men pick up in nonverbal cues. There's very few gender differences that actually are consistently borne out by the research. One of them that there's a pretty solid body of studies around is that women pick up a lot more information from facial expressions, from body language. And so if you think about what that means, it means we're processing a lot more, and that includes people's reactions to us, right? We're processing a lot more of people's subtle reactions to us than our male counterparts are. And that's something that can be distracting for us. This particular study done at Harvard also found that contrary to all that research on the benefits of high emotional intelligence, there's also some downsides of high emotional intelligence around morale and productivity, which I think really speaks to what I'm talking about, right? If you have very high emotional intelligence, you're picking up all those cues, it can interfere with a certain kind of productivity. You may feel kind of down about the dynamics you're observing that other people aren't even noticing. So that's another way we can get hooked on people's reactions to us. We just get more information about that as women. We're oblivious to less. And that can be helpful, but we have to be really discerning about when it's helpful and when it's not. And then lastly, another factor that informs our relationship to feedback is our history, again. That if you think about women's history, right, for most of our history, women could not survive through financial power, political power, physical strength. We didn't have those things, right? We weren't going to be able to survive or ensure the survival of our dearest ones through physical might, through political rights, through legal protection, through financial ownership of property. We didn't have any of those things. And our primary survival strategy, or you could also say our primary strategy for thriving, was social influence and likability, right? Working through relationships to do what would be approved of or tolerable or met with a positive reaction. And the reason that's so important is because for a lot of us, there's a kind of legacy of that still lives, where conflict or harsh criticism really does feel life-threatening. Really can feel life-threatening if we really tune into our inner experience of it. And that's why. So, how do we unhook from praise and criticism? There are a bunch of strategies in the book. There's one I want to focus on today, which is changing your story about feedback. And the new story that I want to offer you today is sounds a little bit radical to some people at first, so hang in there with me. And it's this, that feedback never tells you anything about yourself. It can only tell you about the person giving the feedback. So I'm guessing this is a pretty feedback-oriented culture, yes? We have to take feedback very seriously. It's going to help us grow. It's key to our development. It's integral, something great leaders are always looking for a lot of feedback. So to say feedback can never tell you anything about you, it can only tell you about the people you're getting feedback from, kind of seems like it flies in the face of that. So let's talk about that for a minute. So let's say your manager says, you're really great with details and project management, but there's something missing in the sort of team interaction and the ability to motivate people and make them feel comfortable, kind of on the soft skills side. There's something missing. So that's the feedback. So what does that tell us about you? Does that tell us you're a good project manager? Does that tell us there's something missing on the soft skill side? Does it tell us any facts about that, really, when you think about it? The only fact we're actually getting there is the fact of, that is the feedback my manager gave me. That sounds like that's the feedback, that is the his or her perception, his or her experience of my work. That's the fact. That's his or her experience of my work. What if your whole team says, well, you're a really great project manager, great with the details, but we all feel kind of like we can't connect, or we're not really motivated by you. Does that give us any facts about you? Does that give us some facts about that group of people? Perhaps some facts about what's coming across to them? Tells us about their experience of you. So the next step there is not to dismiss the feedback. This is not, oh, that's all about them, so I'm going to ignore it. It's, oh, that's giving me information about these individuals. And if these are people that I want to work with effectively, if these are important stakeholders to what I'm doing, I'm going to really listen to that feedback. I'm going to try and understand what it is telling me about them, what they need from me, what they expect of me, what they expect of someone in this role, what works for them and what doesn't. And if I want to work with them effectively, I may incorporate or adapt with some of that feedback. So the power of that is that when we're looking at feedback as that's information about them, we don't get defensive. You never have to decide if it's true or not. You never have to call your friend and talk about how crazy your manager is for what they said, because it really doesn't matter whether it's true in some objective sense or not. What matters is you're getting information about someone who potentially is an important stakeholder for you. And when we're not taking it personally, when we're not making the feedback about us, something interesting happens. We start to get really curious about the feedback because it's not personal. We're not defending against it. Oh, interesting. They think I'm not connecting with people. I would love to understand more, like, what is their vision of what that looks like? Or how do they see that fitting into my job? Where would that happen in the flow of my work, right? We can ask a lot of questions. We can learn more. We can be truly open. And then we can adapt and incorporate the feedback, but from the perspective of that's what it takes to be effective here, not from the perspective of there's something defective about me. And that is so important for us, particularly for women, for people of color, because the feedback we get is often going to be impacted by bias. And we don't want to take that on and make it about us. We want to allow it to be looked at more neutrally and with more curiosity. What is this telling me about what it takes to be effective in this context? So thoughts, questions on anything we talked about today. And this is a great time, I always say this is a great time to not listen to your inner critic, right? Take that first step of, if you hear the voice in your head saying, that question it's not well thought out enough yet, or it might not be a good question, or maybe she said that and I didn't catch it. That's your inner critic. So this is a great opportunity to practice not listening to that voice.
While women may receive more negative feedback about about more personal attributes, that they may get actually less useful critical feedback about things they can do to grow that men in the same position do. So I'd love any thoughts on that and maybe strategies for getting more of that kind of feedback.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you're referring, there was one study that came out last fall about the feedback that women get tends to be more general and more vague. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Just that it's another really important thing to be aware of, right? I think for men and women, knowing these trends are so important because it means if you look at your performance review, you can say, oh, a lot of this feedback is personality driven. There's nothing specific here that's tied to the core objectives for my role, okay, that's not just me. I know that's part of a larger pattern. And that's potentially then something you might want to ask for more specifically. If you're in the kind of team or department where you can have a constructive discussion outside of specific performance reviews, like circulate those articles, right? And make sure everybody who's giving and receiving performance reviews is aware of those patterns so they can catch themselves in them. I spoke at a company a few years ago and was talking about this, the personality feedback thing, and talking about the word abrasive and how abrasive is, it's very commonly used with women. It's never used with men. And there was a male executive in the audience who said, I just used that word in 3 performance reviews last week with 3 women, and now I realize I need to go change it. So I think raising the awareness there is huge, and then asking for more specific feedback and feedback around your objectives for your job is really important if you see that's happening in your reviews.
One thing that I think a lot of women at Google struggle with, because tech can be a very, very male-dominated world, and I personally work in sales at Google, so business is also a fairly male-dominated world, is that there's this constant conflict between discomfort in the situation that you're in and wanting to improve it and wanting to make sure that people are educated about implicit bias and all that good stuff. But at the same time, yearning for a community where that doesn't have to be explained, that it's already understood. So in your experience coaching, did you ever find women that were also dealing with that dichotomy, and how did you coach them through it?
Yeah, I would just say I think that's a really important need. I would go further than to say it's a want. Like, it's a need to have that kind of like-minded community, or community where you feel like you don't have to be in change agent mode and navigating how exactly do I be a diplomatic change agent, right, all the time. And that can happen in a lot of ways. It could happen with women inside your organization if there's an opportunity for that. It is the reason that I think a lot of women do things that even are cross-industry, whether that's a group coaching experience or some other kind of self-formed women's group or a book club that talks about these issues or whatever. It's just so tremendously nourishing for people, and I would really encourage you to create that whatever way you can.
What was the most challenging pushback you experienced in trying to play big and speak up?
Personally, or
Yes.
Yeah? That's a great question. Well, I'm writing a lot of political pieces now, so that's interesting. I get some pushback around that. And for me, it's usually around political or social issues, and that's definitely a playing big edge for me that I still grapple with. Like, how much do I really want? How much am I really willing to speak out about what I perceive as happening in our collective milieu? And yeah, I just find the more radical I get with that, the more pushback I get. So it's a good playing big edge for me. And I think, we're all always on this journey of what's my playing big edge now? What feels really scary but important now? That doesn't end. Yeah.
In terms of educating those around us, so the men in the room,
Yeah.
Especially
And
when
the
they're
women.
in
Yeah.
very senior leadership positions, and you can see certain characteristics and behaviors kind of trickle through all of the layers. Coming to talks like this is fantastic, but how do we help bring that message outward?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that I believe the education really needs to happen for everyone, and not just women for themselves, but women for how they manage and work with other women. The research, for example, the research on the double bind, that women are often perceived as competent or likable, but not both. That phenomenon is worse with a female manager than a male manager. And a lot of times there is a kind of policing that women have done of their own voices or their own expression or whatever they had to compartmentalize on the way up that really makes it hard for them to fully support other women. So I think, it's really important to think of the education and the conversation as needing to happen for everyone. And it's tricky because with leaders, and I would say even particularly with female leaders, the most important thing is that they're doing their own playing big work. Because you really can't support in another, as a woman, you will not end up supporting in another woman what you are not allowing in yourself. So if you're walking on eggshells with the way you express your voice, you really don't want a direct report who's not. That's not gonna go over well, right? So and I think that's really important for everyone to reflect on. How do I do my own playing big work, knowing that's gonna change my ability to embrace and support others' ambitions? That's more effective than, receiving an education.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
That's
everyone.
all we have today. Thank you.